So as of 2 days ago, Israel has now sent in ground forces into southern Lebanon with the stated goal of eliminating Hezbollah so that the 60,000 or so displaced Israelis in the northern part of the country can return. Is this realistic given that it's been a year now since October 7th and they still cannot defeat Hamas, which is much more poorly funded and disparate and poorly armed compared to Hezbollah?
Well, I just heard now that there's been 400 ballistic missiles fired by Iran that are now arriving in Israel. So they're under a massive barrage attack from Iran happening right now. I think it's Israeli New Year, isn't it? Rosh Hashanah today. So it's a big conversion of events. I don't think a ground invasion in Lebanon is going to go particularly well for the IDF. It did not go well in 2006. They lost a lot of troops, lost a lot of equipment. That terrain is also very advantageous for the defender. They've interlaced a lot of interlocking fields of fire and bunkers and minefields. And now they've added suicide drones to the mix of anti-tank missiles. What I suggested to the IDF is that they, instead of having to do a ground offensive, look, they did a magnificent job with the pagers and then the walkie-talkies the next day, and then some very strategic deep bombing into the command bunkers of Hezbollah, wiped out. They decapitated all of Hezbollah. Magnificently done. But you still have a lot of ground forces that need cleanup, and the rest of Lebanon is really not embracing the idea that has not embraced the idea that Hezbollah is such a military force in the country, actually much more powerful than the Lebanese armed forces itself. So Israel can degrade it a lot with airstrikes and precision missile capability to try to take out the houses that are storing all these rockets, 150,000-ish, many of which are also being fired into Israel now, I'm sure. But for lasting stability to happen in Lebanon has to get rid of Hezbollah as a military force. Hezbollah as a political party, fine. Hezbollah as a military force, not really sustainable to have two militaries with the Lebanese armed forces actually being the weaker partner. The Sunnis, the Druze, the Christians in Lebanon don't like the fact that the Shia have their own Hezbollah force. And so I recommended it's a perfect application for a private military company, is to advise and supercharge the capability of the Lebanese armed forces, give them the leadership, intelligence, communications, medical, weapons expertise with some good drone capability to go door to door, block by block, and clean up the rest of the Hezbollah capability. That would have required some fighting, yes, but much better for Lebanon to police its own backyard than Israel to have to do it, which would guarantee an antibody response from all the Lebanese and actually lead to a lot more fighting and a lot more casualties unnecessarily. Now, this big strike with Iran, that's inevitable. They have to strike back. They've lost so much credibility. Their main surrogate that they have been building literally since the first Lebanon War in 1982, they have been building up Hezbollah 42 years, and they just had the decapitation done, and whether the main body gets chewed up or not, this is Iran's answer to that. They are shooting those missiles now so that I guess they don't get destroyed in airstrikes possibly in the future. But this could be a major escalation if and when some of those 400 missiles get through and damage Israeli infrastructure or citizens.
Now, it's 2 or 3 days ago, the morning of the announced invasion, Netanyahu goes on TV and tells Iran that they don't need to worry, basically. I don't know if you saw that, but he's trying to,
I didn't.
Yeah, it seemed like he was trying to settle him down, or he was saying, hey, look, our fight's not with you, Lebanon, our fight is not with the people of Lebanon, et cetera. It's with Hezbollah. But what does this imply now that Iran has basically ignored that and is now supplying Hezbollah for a counterstrike? What are the implications, for a larger conflict? Does this involve Russia? I know the Minister of Defense, I believe, in Russia has visited Iran in recent weeks. Do you see this pulling the Russians into the conflict, and how would that then force the U.S. to get involved?
Look, this is not the U.S. fight. We do not need to be putting troops in there. It is not in our strategic interest. The last time the U.S. put troops in Lebanon in 1983, that was a disaster. 243 Marines get blown up one morning for the audacity of being peacekeepers trying to bring some stability to Lebanon. Again, it would have been better to use a PMC capability and actually build the Lebanese armed forces enough to clean up their own backyard. I don't see the Russians getting involved. I don't see them having the stomach for another big fight, another big escalation. The United States should not be there and involved. And I hope the Israeli defenses are very good and very capable to knock down all those ballistic missiles incoming, fired from Iran. I'm sure a lot of them are fired from Iraq. Some of them are fired from Lebanon, certainly, and I'm sure some of them are fired even from Yemen. I just saw a picture of Houthi leaders in Russia buying weapons from the Russians, and who's doing it? Who's doing the deal? Victor Bout. Victor Bout, the arms dealer, who is in prison for, I think, a life sentence for trying to sell missiles to communist rebels in Colombia. And the Biden administration traded him away for Brittany Griner, the American-hating basketball player, because she had pot on her when she went to Moscow. Unbelievable. So now this guy is literally selling weapons to the Houthis that they're firing at U.S. Navy warships. Wow. Again, you can't make it up.
The Merchant of Death, I believe, was his moniker, and he didn't waste any time, did he?
And he's back in the market. Wow. No, you know what? No, I am sure he is an indispensable asset to Putin, who is buying up, because they're using at a very high rate of speed artillery shells and rockets and munitions and propellant. And I'm sure his relationships in every other developing country with every factory that's producing that stuff is exceedingly useful to the Russian war machine. It would be like, it's like if you're going to play a hockey match and you want your star forward, you want Wayne Gretzky off the bench playing in your front line. That was Victor Bout, and Joe Biden gave him that gift.
Yeah. For a girl who had some hash oil on her and got herself arrested. Unbelievable. Well, look, you say this isn't the U.S.'s fight, and I totally agree with you. However, it's all of our money that's funding what's going on. So my next question to you is, should at this point, it's pretty exceedingly clear that Netanyahu is escalating in order to preserve his political stance, his political power, and maybe even his freedom. He might get arrested, on corruption charges. So in knowing that, should the U.S. be funding Israel?
Well, they just sent another $8 billion last week on top of another $8 billion to Ukraine, which I am very much opposed to. Again, Israel is not lacking for funds. They have significant national savings. They have plenty of people that support them financially. It does not need to be the taxpayers, especially when we have millions of Americans just over the last 5 days had their homes, their livelihoods, their farms annihilated by a massive hurricane and flooding afterwards. We need to focus on the American people first and not funding everyone else's border security and everyone else's wars, especially when we can't afford it. So it's a problem. We need actually representatives that represent Americans, American citizens, and not everyone else.
Do you see a probable Trump victory as changing the course of, basically this largesse, this government military industrial complex, endless foreign aid that's been going on for, decades now?
If Trump is elected, I think he can go a long ways to restoring deterrence by credibly deploying American power where it has to be, and keeping it mostly on the shelf. I don't think there's an old Roman quote, and I think it applies to the Biden administration and their foreign policy, and it goes like, "Do not quote laws to men holding swords." And the constant nagging of the Biden administration to always have restraint. And, we've effectively allowed the U.S. Navy to be defeated by the Houthis, and they have shut off a major waterway in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab, to the massive detriment of global trade. Egypt is losing $800 million a month. That's 40% of their GDP was represented by Suez Canal traffic. Gone to zero now, and the sit in your hands and hope foreign policy of the Biden administration is alarming, and since it's Jimmy Carter's birthday, I think today it's the perfect 100-year birthday gift that he is indeed not the worst president we've had in the last 100 years.
Yeah, and he doesn't look as bad as our current president either, which is saying something.
He's probably sharper mentally.
Yeah, I think so. So what would those American power, those strategic American power deployments, where should those be right now? Like, how would you clean it up if we say we cut funding off, which I don't personally think can happen under Trump, because I think the system is so rigged. I think it's going to take a lot more. I think it's going to take, real contrarians in his cabinet that he staffs, which it could happen. Tulsi Gabbard, there's talks of her, being high up there, maybe RFK Jr., et cetera. But what would those first 90 days to clean up the Middle East and to effectively deploy American power, what would that be? I mean, obviously, you mentioned the Houthis in the Red Sea. What else?
Look, the Houthis in the Red Sea could be defeated by a combination of local forces led by, when we think about what was effective after 9/11, was 100 SAF in Afghanistan that with good communications, good targeting equipment that could call down precision weapons. Now you can do that with very small, cheap drones, not U.S. made ones, because the U.S. defense industry will sell you a $75,000 or $100,000 loitering drone, and you could actually make the same thing now with the tech components for around $3,000 a piece. So it's staggering how much technology is advanced. Pressure can be applied there. There's just so many places the U.S. has been going through in a very half-assed way. In Somalia, in Libya, pretty much anywhere that AFRICOM touches, it's half-assed and ineffective. We've allowed a socialist, now really Marxist type clique, a cartel, to steal not one, not two, but 3 elections in Venezuela, and continue to export very leftist paradigm and politics and all the mistakes of socialism throughout Latin America. There's a lot of places that can be pushed back and tightened up quite quickly.
Do you, in your view, is that okay? Is it good and right and necessary for the U.S. to meddle in foreign governments whose elections didn't go the way we thought they should? Because yes, I totally agree. Socialism's flawed.
It doesn't have to be. Well, in the case of Venezuela, you have concerted state power of Cuba, Russia, Iran, helping the Maduro cartel. It doesn't have to be USG money, but they can allow other nations, other free people to go put enough pressure on effectively a narco state to actually revert to a democracy again. I trolled Maduro in August after the election on Twitter. And I said, if Biden and Harris actually want to support democracy and freedom in Venezuela, they should up the bounties on Maduro and Diosdado Cabello, because there's already there's a warrant for the arrest of Maduro with a $15 million bounty. There's a $10 million bounty on Cabello, his interior minister. I said, raise those to $100 million each. You could use frozen Venezuelan government money. Doesn't even need to be U.S. taxpayers, but sit and raise it to 100 each and sit back and watch the magic happen. Because there would be Venezuelan military that would flip, arrest them, deliver them all in zip ties,
right? And
you'd go back to having a representative government, because they actually had an election. The opposition won by 70-30, more than 2-1, and that drug cartel in Caracas decided to stay and ignore a third election. So, yeah, there's a lot of ways to solve those problems. It does not involve U.S. government, U.S. invasion. I mean, the way it was solved in Panama in 1989, when you had a drug cartel running Panama, Noriega, but that was done with 27,000 troops. It doesn't need that many. We'll leave it at that.
For sure. No, Maduro sucks. A lot of people suck around the world. It's I think it just sends a bad message when we support and overthrow governments like the Ukrainian government in 2014. And then
I agree.
And then it just looks hypocritical, and it's just a bad
look
for America.
And then allow them to cancel the election as of last April or May.
Right. Correct. So let's move on to that really quick while we have some time. How does Ukraine-Russia resolve itself? Because to me, that's much scarier in terms of it breaking out into a regional, perhaps even a nuclear war. What do you think?
Look, it's math. And the idea that the Ukrainians are going to magically retake all that terrain, they are outmanned 4-1. And in a war of attrition, the larger party wins. And there's not any significant tech advancement or miracle tactic that's going to change that. I think it's much better for the survival of Ukrainian society to freeze the lines where they are, go to a north-south Korea type settlement, and the Ukrainians can focus on making babies and growing their economy and regrowing their population, because it's taken a massive pounding and killed 400,000 or 500,000 of their most capable males, chewed up in a really an unnecessary war. It's really, really tragic.
How certain are you of those figures, that casualty count? Because, obviously from alternative media, you hear numbers like that. And that's all I watch. All I watch is Breaking Points and Tucker, and I watch the internet, right? Like most people my age and below. But then, mainstream media, you never hear figures like that. All you hear is the body count from the Russian side. So how certain are you about that body count? I'm just curious.
The fact is, there's people dying on both sides every day, in the dozens or sometimes hundreds per day. And whether it's 100,000 dead or 500,000 dead, Ukraine could hardly afford that kind of head count to begin with. And the fact that they have to press gang and arrest young men in Ukraine is an extremely bad look for society. Mm-hmm. When you have to coerce people to go to the front lines. I mean, the Russians are shooting people that are deserting as well. That's just a bad. There's no way to call that a great move on either side.
Totally. Do you think a Trump administration can pick up the phone and make it stop like that, or is it going to take? Is it going to take more than that?
Well, the U.S. is still funding most of the effort, despite all the noise of NATO. They're not really doing anything. They've never done anything to affect their industrial capacity or actual real spending. Germany has largely been useless, and still remains useless. The single largest economy in Germany, in Europe. You have Scholz, the chancellor of Germany, is a longtime Soviet-controlled paid agent. He was in the 80s. There's pictures of him at East German-sponsored anti-nuclear rallies against the Pershing and cruise missile deployments as a willing leftist student activist controlled by the Stasi. So this idea that Germany has any kind of right-wing government, that's why you're seeing the AfD make such political strides, is because people are sick of the immigration nonsense and really the destruction of German culture at the behest of kind of a Comintern. So this war gets settled when the U.S. says no more funding, no more weapons, take the deal. Mm-hmm. And I think what Putin has demanded is Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and obviously Crimea. And Crimea, they regard as Russia, but the other areas that I just mentioned, they expected to govern for 20 years and then have a plebiscite whether those would stay with Russia or go with Ukraine. That's what the demand is. Who knows if that's actually real? But again, it is the long-term interest of the United States to pull Russia away from China. It was the long-term, it was a 100-year goal of the United States to keep German industry from combining with Russian resources. And all that this stupid war has accomplished is pushing Russian resources into a subjugated role with the Chinese Communist Party industrial base. That is a nightmare for the United States. That is not a good outcome, foreign policy-wise. And culturally, we have way more in common with Russia than we do with India or Korea or Japan or really any part of Southeast Asia. Russia doesn't have to be our best friend, but they long-term belong much more with Europe than they do with Asia. Medium term, Russia, and long term, Russia has a huge demographic problem as their population shrinks as well. And they have huge parts of the Russian East that become literally unpopulated and subject to being moved into by Chinese personnel. So it's, again, I think the best way is actually through trade and through climate stuff. If you're worried about the climate, it's not something I'm worried about. But if you are worried about it, the fastest way to reduce the total tons of carbon emitted in the world per year is by sorting out the thawing tundras of the Russian Arctic. That is way cheaper than forcing everybody into electric vehicles and solar energy.
Yeah, I agree. Make everyone richer is bottom line. Do you hear about in alternative press is BRICS, the BRICS alliance, moving away from the U.S. dollar, the multipolar world, no longer a unipolar world, it's now a multipolar world. How much veracity is there to that in your view? Is it going to be a Russia, United States, and perhaps a Chinese-controlled world now? Is the U.S. after all of this no longer the hegemon? Are we still the big daddy?
The overuse of sanctions has done more to enhance the BRICS as an economic bloc than their own than the case for their own economies, because cutting off Russia from oil trade, right? They're a huge producer of energy, and someone's going to buy that, and someone is buying that. China and India and some of the rest of the world. And so they pay with currencies outside of the dollar. And so that de-dollarization of oil sales is hugely problematic. Our way of life, the $34 trillion of debt was created because Congress could print unlimited dollars because the dollar was the world's reserve currency. When you put that under attack by the overuse of sanctions and pushing people to trade outside of that, that threatens all of it. Now, the yin and the yang to that is if the dollar is cut off, that means we can't spend at deficit levels anymore, and it makes the U.S. government go on a diet, which is, in my mind, a great idea because government expands at the price of liberty.
Sure.
And our government does so much stupid shit because it can spend so much money. So we will be forced to spend less on social programs and less on defense and just less on everything, putting government on a diet is a very, very good idea.
I totally agree. And that, I guess, leads me to this last kind of generalized question, which I'm so excited to finally meet you and speak with you because, the military industrial complex, I don't even know if anyone in Washington calls it anymore, but that's just the classic term for this kind of marriage between the defense industry, the foreign lobbies like AIPAC, even though I know they're American, right? In my view, that's a treasonous kind of organization, et cetera, and politicians who take their money.
Well, I think that any lobby organization advocating for the rights of another country should just be treated like any other foreign lobby organization. That's right. That's intellectually consistent.
Yes. But in general,
and so they should have to register like everybody else.
That's right. And have the oversight of other foreign lobbies. So, but in general, that's kind of what I mean by the military industrial complex or the corporate lobbyist complex. You yourself, the founder of Blackwater, were a benefactor of the military industrial complex when we went to war in the Middle East. And we saw kind of what good that did, and I'm sure Blackwater was a lot more efficient than the U.S. government in achieving certain tasks over there. But, looking back now, 20 years later, what do you think the solution is moving forward? Is it using private military as a way that's cheaper and less destructive to, entire regions like the Middle East? Because clearly we're worse off than we were before we went to Iraq.
So the thing about the defense budget, it's way too high. But you divide the military budget, it's about half. About half is personnel costs, and the other half is operations and call it capital purchases. On the personnel side, we should pay the capable soldiers significantly more, but there's a massive top grading that should happen because we have an enormous amount of military personnel that are largely, I would say, not worth what their costs are. The tooth to tail ratio of the U.S. military is like 12-1, meaning 12 tail, 1 tooth. I would advocate to make a lot more teeth and pay them more and get rid of the egregious fat and obesity we have in the support staff and high cost DoD civilians and contractors. On the equipment side, we used to have 100 major defense contractors. The Clinton administration consolidated that down to 5. And that 5 really behaves like a cartel, which is why overall we spend more than the next 17 countries combined in defense. And we don't get great value for it. And so there's breaking that up, causing a lot more efficient purchasing, et cetera, is necessary. But when it comes to the conduct of whatever it is you're doing overseas, when you remove price from the equation, when generals don't know what anything costs them to do a thing, that removes them of the most important piece of information, which is scarcity. Like, how important is that? And so that's why you had $250 a gallon fuel in Afghanistan by the time it put into the Humvee.
Right.
Because they were importing that fuel from the Mediterranean by ship all the way to Karachi by truck all the way up into Afghanistan, delivered to some firebase. And the so-called smart generals that were running the place ignored the fact that there was an oil field in Afghanistan that they could have spent $20 million to drill and $150 million in a refinery, and you would have had all the fuel you need to power all of Afghanistan: jet fuel, gasoline, diesel, heavy fuel oil to make electrical power. And you could have done that in 2002. And literally the U.S. was funding 1/3 of the Taliban's operating budget because they told the fuel. So again, there's so many ways to make things vastly more cost effective by just reminding or educating people what things actually cost. And the reason we were more efficient doing it, is because, believe me, if I had to put 100 people in the field, I knew exactly what it cost to train them, feed them, clothe them, insure them, travel them back and forth. Trust me, my people could quote that off the top of their head because we were on the hook for those costs.
Right. You're a business.
And we were not a line item in a budget where money just fell on our heads.
Right.
No, we had to bid and we had to live with the cost commitments that we made.
Right.
No person in the military has to do anything like that exercise. And that's why it's so disjointed.
And I assume when you can print unlimited money, when you are the world's reserve currency, that causes conflicts to go on a lot longer than they need to, right? Because you have no fiscal discipline. You have no budgetary responsibilities. And
that's, when you look at for example, the East India Company was there not to make war. They were there to trade. They were there to facilitate trade, secure the logistics, collect the taxes, enforce contracts. And not everything the East India Company did was perfect, but it maintained stability for 250 years and built tens of thousands of miles of irrigation, created millions of acres of fertile land, ended private prisons, ended wife burning, stopped the Hindus and the Muslims from slaughtering each other in the subcontinent. That is the model if you're going to be in stability operations, not just doing combat. The Brits had an old statement that a functioning workshop was better than a battalion of soldiers. And the U.S. would have been wise to follow that advice.
Yeah. The Brits, man, for all their mistakes, they read a lot more than us. They were a lot more intellectual,
Well, they look, I think it's important to remember how America was even founded.
Well,
it was not founded by British soldiers. It was founded by companies. The Massachusetts Bay, Jamestown, Plymouth colonies were founded as companies listed effectively as joint stock companies in London, in the city of London.
Wow.
And when you think about Miles Standish or John Smith, those guys were private military contractors, former professional soldiers hired on by the company to build and protect those colonies in the New World, to look for gold, to raise tobacco. Up in Massachusetts, they were there also to look for tall trees. Why? Because Her Majesty needed tall masts for ships. Right. So again, started as trading and grew into established trading colonies, which became states. And that, I think that's even the model as you see millions of people coming to America illegally. What are they coming for?
Jobs.
They're coming for a slice of the American dream. Now, they should come in a legal, organized, disciplined process, not whoever pays the cartel to come across our border.
Right.
But they're coming for American governance. And that's probably what what our private sector should be the best at exporting, is the model of running small and mid-sized cities with police that work, with water that runs from the tap that you can drink, with a sewage system that flushes, and power company that works. If you get those basic 4 or 5 things right, plus private property rights in city states, that's a model that works, that the rest of the world is craving, because those models that you see in Europe and the United States, and not really anywhere else, to that depth of the infrastructure. Basically, we call it the basic infrastructure of capitalism: title for your land, a bank account, a business license, a letter of credit, an address, all those things that we take for granted. Hernando de Soto does a great job of talking about that in The Mystery of Capital.
Yeah. That guy's a G. That guy's a G. I like that dude. He's Peruvian, I think.
Exactly.
And he's like, look at how simple it is. You just draw up contracts to show who owns the land, and then you guys won't kill each other because it's stated. We got it in a vault.
That's exactly how they had when he came back from Switzerland in the 80s, he was working at a construction company, and he came back to Peru and said, why is Peru such a shithole? Why is Switzerland so nice? And he did a comparison. And at that point, there was a Maoist communist insurgency going in Peru. And his solution was, hey, let's make sure the farmers had clear title for their land. And that worked. Within months, the farmer was like, hey, man, get off my land.
Yep.
Go away, commie. I got this.
Right.
And that should be the export of American foreign policy, is the American way. If people want it by choice, the American way of governing things, because our cities, our communities, our states in America are really quite well done. The biggest problem in America is an obese federal government that just does all kinds of stupid shit.
So I couldn't agree more. Now but what you just said there has been the problem, since basically we started printing money, the early 70s. It's exporting the American way of life. One could argue at the barrel of a gun, right? Which causes all this illegal immigration from Haiti, which we've been with for a century, and Venezuela.
No. Exporting it at the barrel of a gun, that's not what caused Haiti. Haiti caused its own problems. Haiti has been a free country for 220 years. No colonialism. They threw out the French. Haiti just cannot get its own shit together.
Look, we can go back and forth about that. There was massive debt laid on them by the French after that. And, you could argue that the IMF, giving out usurious loans and forcing, third world countries to take loans, which like a guy like Bukele in El Salvador is rejecting, which I think is dope. But what are you doing right now to further this along? Because I know you're up to something, because you're on all the podcasts. You've got your own channel, which people should absolutely check out. Erik is like, a political scientist, military strategist, killer businessman all in one. But what do you have cracking now? You're popping around, every different corner of the earth.
We developed a new phone. That's been my main project the last 3 years, completely independent of the Google and Apple universe.
Wow.
Because I was sick of big tech, basically having way too much control over who is on their store and really being able to impair free speech. And so I said, we're never going to make big tech better by complaining, only if we can compete with it. So we built our own platform, our hardware, our operating system. But the difference is our phone operating system does not collect on your data. It prevents the apps sitting on your phone from collecting and exporting where you go, what you buy, who you call, what you browse. Stops the apps from turning on your microphone, or your GPS, or your camera, which your phone does 100%.
Yep.
But an unplugged phone does not. So we did 500 units last November as a beta, and then we got 10,000 units in, and we just ordered our next 10,000.
What do they retail for? I'll buy one. I'll promote one for free on this show. This is incredible.
$989.
Okay.
It's comparable in speed, storage, camera quality to the high end from the other guys, but this operating system prevents the export of your data. We have our own store. Most of the apps that you're used to will run on here, just not Google mobile services. And you can order one at unplugged.com.
Unplugged.com, and check out your channel, Erik Prince, just Erik Prince on YouTube.
It's Off Leash.
Off Leash
with Erik Prince.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, Erik with a K. I always spell your name wrong when I'm texting you. That's why it's taking you so long to get on here.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
I know you got to take off. Look forward to maybe doing this again, but I appreciate your take, and I'm really admire what you're doing. So thanks again, and
thanks.
And we'll talk later. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.